So, uh, what if I told you that, 85% of your financial and professional success has absolutely nothing to do with how good you actually are at your job?
I mean, on its face, that sounds completely absurd, right? We spend, decades in school. We take out these massive loans.
Right.
We study late into the night to master all these hard skills for our professions. We learn the math, the science, the coding languages.
Yeah, the legal precedents, all of that. You'd assume, if you're an engineer, your success is based entirely on how well you understand structural integrity or thermodynamic.
You would think so, yeah.
But there was this massive landmark study done by the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching, and it was later backed up by the Carnegie Institute of Technology.
Right. Highly reputable institutions.
Exactly. And they looked at financial success in these really highly technical fields, specifically engineering, and they found that a person's technical knowledge only accounts for about 15% of their financial success.
Just 15%. That
Yeah.
is wild.
Yeah. The other 85% is entirely due to skill in what they called human engineering.
Human engineering. I love that term. Because it basically means personality, right? It means the ability to communicate,
Yeah.
to negotiate, to lead, and honestly, to navigate friction.
Oh, human friction is everywhere.
It really is. And what's so striking about that Carnegie statistic is that it proves human friction is like the ultimate unpredictable variable.
Right.
You can build a perfectly flawless bridge on paper, but if you can't communicate with the construction crew.
Or navigate the massive ego of the city planner.
Exactly. Or resolve some petty dispute between your contractors. That bridge never gets built. It just stays on the paper.
And that is the exact mission of our deep dive today. We are unpacking the legendary principles of human engineering from Dale Carnegie's absolute classic, How to Win Friends and Influence People.
A book that, frankly, everyone should read.
Oh, absolutely. But right up front, I want to clarify something for you listening out there. Whether you're on your morning commute or, making breakfast, we are not looking at a list of cheap, manipulative parlor tricks.
No, not at all. Because manipulation is a short-term game.
Right.
It always ends in resentment. People figure it out. What Carnegie was proposing was a fundamental psychological shift.
Yeah, it's really about abandoning our own ego, stepping out of our own perspective, and actually learning the mechanics of human nature. Because, as the sources point out, we are rarely ever taught this.
Which is crazy when you think about it.
It is. John D. Rockefeller once said that the ability to deal with people is a purchasable commodity, just like sugar or coffee. And he said he would pay more for that ability than for any other skill under the sun.
And he was one of the wealthiest men in history.
Right. Yet, where is the class on this in high school? Or college?
It's largely absent. I mean, we are handed these incredibly powerful technical tools, but no operating manual for the actual people sitting right next to us.
Yes, exactly. No operating manual.
And to understand that operating manual, we really have to start at the absolute baseline of human motivation.
The core foundation.
Right. Before we can persuade anyone or, lead a team, we have to understand what causes humans to just completely shut down.
And the most reliable way to cause a human being to shut down is through criticism. Carnegie is brutally blunt about this. He basically says that criticizing, condemning, or complaining is completely futile.
Futile, not just bad, but totally useless.
Exactly. And the reason why is so fascinating. He points out that 99 times out of 100, people do not criticize themselves for anything, no matter how objectively wrong they are.
That is such a tough pill to swallow for highly logical people.
Oh, for sure.
Because we have this deeply ingrained belief that if we just point out someone's flaw clearly enough and, with enough evidence.
Like a spreadsheet of their mistakes.
Right. We expect them to experience this grand epiphany.
Yeah.
We expect them to say, wow, you are so right. Thank you for pointing out my gross incompetence. I will change immediately.
But they never do. They literally never do. And let me push back here on behalf of anyone listening who has ever managed a team or, dealt with a really difficult family member.
Sure.
If I know someone is messing up and I don't criticize them, aren't I just letting them walk all over me? I mean, if truth actually matters, shouldn't I correct them?
You are touching on the exact paradox that trips up most managers. And partners in relationships, really. It's not that you shouldn't correct the behavior.
Okay.
It's that criticism itself is the absolute worst biological mechanism for achieving that correction.
Biological mechanism. Unpack that.
Well, when you criticize someone, You trigger an immediate defensive response. Their amygdala, the threat detection center of the brain, it completely hijacks their prefrontal cortex.
So they literally stop thinking logically.
Exactly. You put them on the defensive and they immediately begin to justify themselves. You wound their pride, their sense of importance, and you just breed resentment.
So it's not a logical exchange at all. It's a biological threat response.
Spot on. Look at the animal kingdom. B.F. Skinner, the world-famous psychologist, he proved this through extensive experiments.
Oh, the pigeon guy, right.
Right, pigeons, rats.
Yeah.
He showed that an animal rewarded for good behavior learns much faster and retains that learning far better than an animal punished for bad behavior.
Wow.
And modern neuroscience and psychology have proven this translates directly to humans. Criticism doesn't make lasting changes. It just incurs lasting resentment.
There's a great story in the sources that grounds this in a modern workplace setting. There was this safety coordinator at an engineering firm, and his whole job, his one job, was making sure the workers wore their hard hats.
A tough gig.
Very. So his initial approach was super standard. He would see a guy without a hat, flex his authority, quote, the corporate safety regulations, and just demand compliance.
And I can guarantee you what happened next.
Yeah.
The worker put the hat on with a scowl, and the second the coordinator walked away, the hat came right back off.
Exactly, because the coordinator was attacking their autonomy. He was using authority and this implicit criticism to force them to do something.
Which triggers that defensive response.
Right. So he changed his approach entirely. The next time he saw a group of guys without their hard hats, he walked over and didn't mention a single rule.
Not one.
Nope. Instead, he asked a question. He asked if the hats were uncomfortable. He asked if they didn't fit right.
That's smart.
Yeah. And then, in a really conversational tone, he just reminded them that the hat was designed to protect them from a traumatic brain injury. And he suggested they wear it for their own safety.
Notice the psychological shift there. He didn't make it about his authority or the company's strict rules. He made it about their well-being.
He preserved their dignity.
He did.
But hold on, let's raise the stakes here. Because what if it isn't just a hard hat? What if someone does something incredibly, unfathomably dangerous?
Like what?
I'm talking life or death carelessness. Doesn't a severe mistake require severe criticism so they understand the gravity of what they did?
It is a completely natural impulse to want to lash out when we are scared or angry. When someone's incompetence puts us at physical risk, our evolutionary instinct is to punish them.
Right, to yell.
But let's look at how one of the greatest test pilots in history handled exactly that scenario. The sources tell this amazing story about Bob Hoover.
Oh, the air show pilot.
Yes, very famous performer. He's flying this vintage World War II propeller plane back to Los Angeles. He's 300 feet in the air, and suddenly both engines just stop dead.
300 feet in the air, dual engine failure. That is pure terror.
Absolute terror. You have seconds to react.
Oh.
But through sheer unbelievable skill, Hoover manages to maneuver this dead weight of an aircraft and crash land it.
Unbelievable.
The plane is severely damaged, essentially wrecked, but miraculously nobody is killed.
And when he gets out and inspects the wreckage, he finds out exactly why the engines died.
Yes, he does. He discovers that the mechanic back at the airfield had fueled this vintage gasoline-powered propeller plane with jet fuel.
That is not a minor oversight. That is a colossal, careless mistake that almost killed a man and destroyed a priceless historical aircraft.
A fatal mistake, normally.
If that were me, I don't know if I could control myself. I really don't. I would be screaming. I would want that mechanic's career ended immediately.
Most people would have unleashed the tongue lashing of a century. So imagine Hoover walking up to this young mechanic. The mechanic is already sick with agony.
I bet.
He is standing there, tears literally streaming down his face, knowing he just destroyed this beautiful plane and almost killed his absolute hero.
So what does Hoover do?
Hoover doesn't yell.
Yeah.
He doesn't quote safety manuals. He doesn't even scold him. Hoover walks up, puts his arm around the sobbing mechanic's shoulder and says, "To show you I'm sure that you'll never do this again, I want you to service my F-51 tomorrow."
That gives me chills every time I hear that.
It's incredible. It requires an almost superhuman level of emotional regulation.
Seriously.
But think about the practical result. Do you think that mechanic ever made a fueling mistake again in his entire life?
Never. He probably checked the fuel caps in his sleep for the rest of his life.
Exactly. Hoover understood that the man was already agonizing. His internal circuit breaker was already tripped.
Right.
Yelling at him wouldn't have taught him anything new about aviation fuel. It would have just driven him into a defensive crouch or completely broken his spirit entirely. By showing forgiveness and preserving the man's dignity, Hoover bypassed the defensive response and guaranteed a lifelong dedication to safety.
It's like a circuit breaker in a house. If you surge too much electricity, like too much anger or criticism, the breaker trips and the house goes dark. No information gets through at all.
That is a perfect analogy.
Hoover bypassed the circuit breaker by refusing to send that surge of anger. He kept the lights on.
He did. And it leads us to the natural next question, right? If we eliminate criticism because it trips the circuit breaker, what is the current that actually powers human motivation?
Right. What is the alternative to criticism? Carnegie states it pretty simply: give honest and sincere appreciation.
Which is harder than it sounds.
It is. And to explain why this works, he actually synthesizes the ideas of two massive historical thinkers, Sigmund Freud and John Dewey.
Two heavyweights.
Yeah. So Freud said everything we do springs from two motives: the sex urge and the desire to be great.
Okay.
But John Dewey phrased it slightly differently. He said the deepest urge in human nature is the desire to be important.
The desire to be important.
Yeah.
If you, the listener, take nothing else away from this deep dive today, remember that phrase.
Write it down.
We all have basic wants, right? Food, sleep, shelter, money. And generally in the modern world, those physical wants can be satisfied.
For the most part, yeah.
But there's a longing that is almost as deep as the desire for food, and it is almost never truly satisfied. William James called it a gnawing and unfaltering human hunger. People are starving for appreciation.
It's so true. Carnegie gives these great examples of how this desire shapes our entire society. Like, why does the richest family in town build a 20-room mansion for 3 people?
It's certainly not for shelter.
No, it's for importance. Why do people go into crippling debt to drive a luxury car? Importance. It even drives really dark behavior. The sources note that many young criminals are actually driven by this warped ego, seeking the lurid newspaper headline that makes them feel like a notorious anti-hero.
Wow, yeah. And in the professional world, the leaders who understand this hunger and know how to feed it, they possess an absolute superpower.
Give us an example of that.
Look at Charles Schwab. Back in the early 1900s, when there was literally no income tax, Andrew Carnegie hired Schwab to run the United States Steel Company.
Okay.
And he paid him a salary of over $1 million a year. That is an astronomical sum for that era.
$1 million back then. That's insane.
Right. Now, was Schwab a metallurgical genius? Did he know more about the chemical properties of steel than anyone else?
Schwab himself actually said he didn't. He openly admitted he had dozens of men working under him who understood the technical manufacture of steel far better than he ever did.
So what was Andrew Carnegie paying for? He was paying for Schwab's ability to deal with people. Schwab knew how to arouse enthusiasm. He deeply understood that desire to be important.
Right.
Schwab's own personal philosophy was, there is nothing else that so kills the ambitions of a person as criticisms from superiors. I believe in giving a person incentive to work. So I am anxious to praise, but loath to find fault.
Loath to find fault.
Yes. He noted that in his entire career, he never met a single person, from the lowest laborer to the highest executive, who didn't do better work under a spirit of approval than under a spirit of criticism.
Okay, let me pause you right there, because I can hear a skeptical listener thinking, all right, so I just need to walk into the office tomorrow and tell everyone they're amazing. I'll just flatter my boss, flatter my spouse, and my life will be absolutely perfect.
Right, the easy way out.
But Carnegie specifically warns against that. He says flattery will actually destroy you.
Yes, it will. And the distinction between appreciation and flattery is the razor's edge of human relations.
I want to use a modern analogy here to explain this. Flattery is like an Instagram filter. You slap it on, it smooths everything out, it looks great for about 2 seconds. But everyone who looks closely knows it's entirely fake.
Oh, totally.
And eventually you just look ridiculous for using it. Appreciation, on the other hand, is like taking the time to actually set up good lighting in a room. It illuminates what is genuinely already there.
That is a brilliant way to phrase it. Carnegie uses the analogy of counterfeit money. Flattery is counterfeit.
Right.
If you try to pass it off, eventually you will be caught, and the penalty is a complete loss of trust. Flattery comes from the teeth out. It is insincere and it's selfish. You are only saying it to get something in return.
Exactly.
But appreciation comes from the heart out.
Yeah.
It requires you to stop thinking about yourself for 5 minutes and actually observe the genuine good qualities in the person standing in front of you.
Which is incredibly hard to do because, let's face it, we are obsessively focused on ourselves.
We really are.
And that self-obsession is exactly what trips us up when we try to influence people. Which leads us to the third foundational concept: arouse in the other person an eager want.
This is a big one. This is where we transition from how we react to people to how we actually motivate them to act. And the fundamental flaw most people have is that they try to motivate others by talking about what they want.
Right. The book has this very simple common sense analogy about fishing that I love. Carnegie loved going up to Maine to fish, and personally, he loved eating strawberries and cream.
Delicious.
Very. But when he went fishing, he didn't bait the hook with strawberries and cream.
Because fish notoriously do not care about dairy or fruit.
Exactly. He didn't dangle a strawberry in the water and say to the fish, "Hey, this is delicious, wouldn't you like this?" He baited the hook with worms, because that is what the fish wanted.
Right.
And he asks the reader, why on earth don't we use that same common sense when fishing for people?
Because we project our own desires. We walk into a sales meeting and talk about our quota. We tell our kids to clean their rooms because we want a clean house.
Yeah, we make it about us.
But the brutal biological truth is that nobody else cares what you want. They are exclusively, eternally interested in what they want.
There's a really funny story about Andrew Carnegie, the steel magnate we mentioned earlier, using this on his own family. His sister-in-law was frantic because her 2 boys were away at Yale and they were completely ignoring her letters.
A tale as old as time.
Right. They were so wrapped up in their college lives that they wouldn't write back to their own mother. So Andrew Carnegie bets her $100 that he can get an answer from those boys by return mail without even asking them for a reply.
So how does he bait the hook?
He writes them a very casual, chatty letter, just normal uncle stuff. But at the very end, in the postscript, he casually mentions, "Oh, by the way, I've enclosed a $5 bill for each of you."
Okay.
But, and this is the genius part, he deliberately does not put the money in the envelope. He mails the letter empty.
That is incredibly shrewd.
Back come the replies by return mail. "Dear Uncle Andrew, thank you so much for your wonderful letter. However, it seems you forgot to enclose the money."
Of course.
He didn't demand they write back. He didn't lecture them on family duty. He aroused an eager want.
He gave them a reason to want to respond. And you see this exact same psychology play out in parenting, too. The sources share a story about a father trying to get his toddler son to stop wetting the bed.
Oh, yeah, this is a good one.
The parent had tried everything from the traditional playbook. Scolding, shaming, spanking, none of it worked. Finally, they stopped trying to force their want, which was a dry bed, onto the boy, and asked themselves, how can we make him want to stop?
Which is a profound shift in thinking. What does a 3-year-old want?
He wants to be important. He wants to be a big boy. He wanted to wear pajamas like his dad instead of a nightgown. And he wanted his own bed instead of a crib.
Okay, so what did they do?
They took him shopping. They went to the department store, and the mother winked at the sales clerk and said, "We have a young gentleman here who would like to do some shopping."
They gave him agency. They treated him like a grown-up.
Exactly. The clerk treated him with respect. The boy picked out his own bed. And when it was delivered, the father said, "You aren't going to wet this bed, are you?"
And what did he say?
The boy, swelling with pride over his new grown-up possession, said, "No, I am not." And he didn't. He kept his promise because his pride and his identity were now tied to the outcome. It was his want.
So if we synthesize this foundational layer we've just covered, human beings are not logical creatures. They are creatures of emotion, bristling with prejudices and motivated by pride.
Perfectly said.
If you criticize them, you trip the circuit breaker and they shut down. If you appreciate them, you feed their deepest hunger. And if you want them to do something, you have to frame it entirely around what they desire.
That is the internal paradigm shift right there.
But how does that manifest in the real world? Because, knowing the philosophy is one thing, but how do you take those internal philosophies and translate them into how you walk into a networking event or how you conduct a Zoom meeting?
Right, the practical application.
Okay, let's explore that, because once you understand the internal wiring, you need the outward interface. How do you actually become a person that others naturally gravitate toward? Carnegie outlines 6 ways to make people like you.
Section 2 of our deep dive.
Exactly. And the first 2 ways are almost embarrassingly simple. 1, become genuinely interested in other people. And 2, Smile.
I know, they sound like platitudes on a motivational poster.
They really do.
But the psychology behind them is incredibly robust. Carney makes a bold claim here. He says you can make more friends in 2 months by becoming genuinely interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get people interested in you.
We all know that person at the networking event. You know, the one who hands out business cards like they're dealing blackjack. They're constantly talking about their startup, their vacation, their accomplishments. They are exhausting.
Because they are broadcasting, not receiving. There's actual data on this.
Yeah.
The New York Telephone Company did a massive study of telephone conversations to find out what word is used most frequently.
Oh, this is fascinating.
They analyzed thousands of calls. The most used word by a staggering margin was the personal pronoun I. I want, I did, I need. It's all about me.
Carnegie uses the analogy of a dog here, which I think is just perfect. A dog is the only animal that doesn't have to work for a living. Think about it. A cow gives milk, a chicken gives eggs, a dog just gives love.
It's true.
When you walk within 10 feet of a friendly dog, it starts wagging its tail. It is genuinely thrilled to see you. It doesn't have an ulterior motive. And because of that pure, unadulterated interest in us, we love dogs.
We really do. Contrast that with how humans greet each other, especially in corporate environments. We often have these guarded, flat expressions, which is why the second principle, the smile, is so disruptive.
The sources mention a New York stockbroker who decided to actually test this. He admitted he was a chronic grouch. He barely smiled at his wife. He barked at his employees.
Not a fun guy to be around.
You know. So he decided, as an experiment, to force himself to smile every single morning. He smiled at his wife, he smiled at the subway attendant, he smiled at the elevator operator.
And what was the measurable ROI of this experiment? Did it work?
It revolutionized his life. He said it brought more happiness into his home in 2 months than there had been in the previous year. At work, people who previously thought he was unapproachable started smiling back.
It's infectious.
It really is. It made handling complaints infinitely easier. He literally tracked that his new demeanor was bringing him more business and more dollars every single day.
But, and I'm sure you hear this, let me play devil's advocate here. I know a lot of people, especially today with Zoom fatigue and constant digital communication, who would say, I'm exhausted. I don't feel like smiling. Faking a smile makes me feel like a sociopath.
Yeah, forced positivity can feel really draining.
It's a very modern concern, but it was actually addressed over a century ago by the pioneering psychologist William James.
What did she say?
James taught that we usually assume action follows feeling, meaning we think we smile because we feel happy. But neurologically, action and feeling go together. They are a feedback loop.
Wait, so the physical act of smiling changes the brain?
Yes. It is called the facial feedback hypothesis. By regulating the action, which is under the direct control of our conscious will, we can indirectly regulate the feeling, which is not.
That's wild.
If you physically force your facial muscles into a smile and hold it, it sends a signal to your brain that says, we must be happy right now. And the brain actually begins to release dopamine and serotonin.
It's like a physical API call. You type in the physical command, send it to the brain server, and the server returns the emotional response.
Exactly. You can literally behavior hack your way into a better mood. And when you bring that mood to another person, it opens the door to connection.
But a smile is just the greeting, right? Once the conversation starts, how do you sustain that connection?
That brings us to the next principles. Remember names and be a good listener.
Now, names are something I struggle with, I'll admit it. I am the person who shakes a hand, hears a name, and forgets it 3 seconds later.
A lot of people do.
But the sources talk about Jim Farley. He was the Postmaster General and Franklin D. Roosevelt's campaign manager. He was famous because he could remember the first names of 50,000 people.
50,000 names is not a parlor trick. That is a deliberate, systematic effort.
How did he do it? It wasn't just raw memory, right?
No, not at all. When he met someone, he would actively ask for their full name, ask about their family, their business, their political leanings. He would paint a mental picture of them.
He anchored the name to a story.
Exactly. And years later, he could run into a mechanic in a small town and say, hey, Bill, how are those hollyhocks you planted in the backyard?
The psychological weight of that is immense.
It is. To the human brain, a person's own name is the sweetest, most important sound in any language. Our brains actually have a filtering system called the reticular activating system.
Okay, what does that do?
It filters out millions of bits of irrelevant data so we don't go crazy. But if you were in a crowded, noisy room and someone across the room says your name quietly, you will hear it.
Oh, absolutely. The cocktail party effect.
Right. Your brain prioritizes your name above almost all other stimuli. When you remember someone's name, you are validating their unique existence in the universe.
And once you've validated them with their name, you validate them with your attention. The listening principle is huge. Carnegie tells this story about going to a dinner party and meeting a distinguished botanist.
And Carnegie wasn't a plant guy, right?
Carnegie knew absolutely nothing about botany. Nothing. But he sat there all evening, completely fascinated, listening to this man talk about exotic plants and the history of the humble potato.
And how much talking did Carnegie actually do?
Almost none. He just listened with rapt attention. And yet, at the end of the night, the botanist told the host of the party that Carnegie was a most interesting conversationalist.
A conversationalist when he hadn't even conversed.
Right. Because Carnegie provided the ultimate nourishment for the botanist's ego. We often think of listening as just quietly waiting for our turn to speak.
Yeah, we are formulating our rebuttal while the other person is talking.
True listening is an active transfer of energy. Look at Sigmund Freud. People who were psychoanalyzed by Freud said his listening was unlike anything they had ever experienced.
How so?
It wasn't a piercing, judgmental stare. It was a warm, total concentration that made the patient feel like they were the most important human being on earth at that exact moment.
I think of it like internet bandwidth. When you are formulating what you want to say next, you're trying to upload your thoughts while they're still downloading theirs. The connection lags.
That's a great way to put it.
But when you just sit and give them all your bandwidth to download what they are saying, they feel incredibly understood.
And that leads naturally to the final two principles in this section on connection. Talk in terms of the other person's interests, and make the other person feel sincerely important.
Teddy Roosevelt was an absolute master of this. Anyone who visited the White House was always stunned by how Roosevelt could talk to anyone.
Yeah.
A cowboy, a diplomat, a politician, Roosevelt always knew exactly what to say.
Was he just a walking encyclopedia?
He was well-read, sure, but it was mostly deliberate preparation. If Roosevelt knew you were coming to visit, he would stay up late the night before reading about whatever subject he knew you were passionate about.
Wow.
He knew that the royal road to a person's heart is to talk about the things they treasure most.
But what if you don't have time to prepare? Like, what if it's a random encounter? The book shares a beautiful little anecdote about Carnegie at the post office that I love.
Remind me of that one.
He was waiting in a really long line, and he noticed the clerk looking completely drained by the monotonous job of weighing envelopes and selling stamps.
We've all been there.
Yeah. So Carnegie decided he wanted to make this clerk's day, but he knew he couldn't talk about himself. He had to find something to genuinely admire about the clerk.
He had to find a point of sincere importance.
Right. So as the clerk is weighing the envelope, Carnegie looks at him with real enthusiasm and says, "I certainly wish I had your head of hair."
Such a simple human compliment.
The clerk was startled, and then his face broke out into a massive smile. They had a pleasant little chat, and the clerk probably went home feeling 10 feet tall. Now, somebody later asked Carnegie, what were you trying to get out of him? Did you want free postage?
That cynicism is so prevalent today. If you are nice to a service worker, people assume you want a discount or something.
Exactly. But Carnegie's response to that cynicism is fantastic. He basically says, if our souls are so small that we can't radiate a little happiness without trying to extract a transaction, then we deserve to be miserable.
Oof, that's strong.
It is. He did get something out of it, though. He got the feeling of having done something selfless.
So we have built a really solid framework here. You know how to bypass the defensive circuit breaker by not criticizing. You know how to open the door with a smile, validate with a name, and nourish with listening. You have built immense rapport.
But life isn't just friendly dinner parties and post office chats. What happens when you hit a wall?
The tough stuff.
Right. What happens when you fundamentally disagree with a client or your spouse or your boss? How do you navigate conflict without detonating all the goodwill you just built?
This is the crucible of human relations. Section 3 focuses on the diplomacy of persuasion, and it starts with a rule that feels deeply counterintuitive to most intelligent, argumentative people.
Which is?
The only way to get the best of an argument is to avoid it.
Avoid it. The text literally says to avoid arguments like you would avoid rattlesnakes and earthquakes. Because 9 times out of 10, an argument ends with each contestant more firmly convinced than ever that they are absolutely right.
It is the ultimate lose-lose scenario. Because if you lose the argument, you lose. But if you win it, if you shoot the other person's logic full of holes, prove their data is wrong, and demonstrate that they are intellectually inferior.
Which feels great in the moment.
It does, but you still lose.
Okay, I have to stop you here. This is the part of the book I struggle with the most. Let's say I'm in a corporate strategy meeting. A colleague presents a plan that is based on objectively false data.
Okay.
If we follow their plan, the company loses money. Truth matters. I have to correct them. Are you saying I just nod and smile while they drive the car off the cliff?
Not at all. You have to correct the course, absolutely. But arguing is the wrong mechanism for doing it. Because if you publicly humiliate your colleague with a brilliant logical takedown, what happens?
Well, they look stupid.
You have bruised their ego in front of the entire team. They might concede verbally because you cornered them with facts, but you have birthed an enemy. The text quotes a classic poem. A man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still.
So they just wait in the weeds for the next meeting to sabotage my project.
Precisely. Psychologists actually call this the backfire effect. When a deeply held belief is challenged with contradictory evidence, the brain actually strengthens the original belief to protect the ego.
So presenting facts literally makes them more stubborn?
Yes. So how do you correct the bad data without triggering the backfire effect? That leads to the next principles. Show respect for the other person's opinions. Never say you're wrong. And if you are wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically.
Telling someone you're wrong is basically saying, I'm smarter than you. It is a declaration of war.
It is. So Carnegie suggests a brilliantly soft approach. Instead of saying your data is wrong, you say, well, now look, I thought otherwise, but I may be wrong. I frequently am. And if I am wrong, I want to be put right. Let's examine the facts together.
I may be wrong. There is absolute magic in that phrase. Nobody can get mad at you for admitting fallibility. You completely disarm them.
Completely.
And if you actually are the one in the wrong, admitting it quickly is a superpower. There's a hilarious story in the sources about Carnegie and his dog, Rex.
Oh, the mounted policeman. This is a masterclass in psychological jujitsu.
Yes. Okay, so Carnegie used to take his little Boston bulldog, Rex, to the park. Rex liked to run free, no leash, no muzzle. This was strictly against the law.
Very illegal.
One day, a mounted policeman catches them. The cop is furious. He scolds Carnegie, quotes the law, and says if he ever catches the dog without a muzzle again, he will fine him heavily.
The authority has drawn a firm line.
Right. Well, a few days later, Carnegie is in a secluded part of the park. He thinks no one is around, so he lets Rex off the leash. Suddenly, over the hill comes the exact same mounted policeman.
Oh, no.
Carnegie is caught red-handed. Now, most people would try to talk their way out of it. Oh, officer, there's no one around. He's a small dog, please.
Which forces the police officer to enforce his authority.
Exactly. But Carnegie does the opposite. Before the cop can even open his mouth, Carnegie preemptively attacks himself. He says, officer, you caught me. I am guilty. I have no alibis, no excuses. You warned me last week that if I did this, you would fine me. Hand me the ticket.
He steals the officer's script.
He totally steals the script. The cop, who was riding down the hill fully prepared to be the stern enforcer, suddenly finds his authority being enthusiastically validated by the perpetrator.
It scrambles the brain.
It does. So what does the cop do? He softens. He says, well, now I know it's a temptation to let a little dog run around when nobody is here.
Amazing.
Carnegie insists, no, it's against the law. The cop argues back, a little dog like that isn't going to hurt anybody.
It's an incredible dynamic shift. The perpetrator is demanding punishment, and the police officer is arguing for mercy.
The cop ended up just telling him to take the dog over the hill where he couldn't see them and letting him go. By taking the blame quickly and emphatically, Carnegie shifted the officer's ego. The only way the officer could feel important and magnanimous was to show mercy.
And that concept of starting from a place of agreement or submission leads into the next highly effective persuasion techniques. Begin in a friendly way and get the other person saying, yes, yes, immediately.
The historical example here is wild. John D. Rockefeller facing a massive violent coal miner strike in Colorado.
A really ugly situation.
Miners are destroying property, troops are called in, blood is literally being shed. The miners despise Rockefeller. They view him as the ultimate greedy capitalist villain.
A toxic, combustible environment. If Rockefeller walks into a meeting with the strike leaders and starts aggressively defending his profit margins, what happens?
A riot. So instead, he spends weeks visiting the mining camps. He meets their wives. He plays with their kids.
Humanizes himself.
Yes. When he finally addresses the representatives, he doesn't draw a spreadsheet. He begins in a profoundly friendly way. He says it is one of the proudest days of his life to meet the representatives of the workers. He says they are meeting not as strangers, but as friends.
He drops honey, not gall.
Exactly. And it completely breaks the tension. The miners eventually go back to work without another word about the wage increase they had been violently demanding.
Abraham Lincoln famously said, "A drop of honey catches more flies than a gallon of gall." If you want to persuade someone, first convince them that you are their sincere friend. And once you have that friendly footing, you use the yes-yes method.
The text uses a billiard ball analogy here. When you hit a billiard ball in one direction, it takes a lot of force to deflect it and an immense amount of force to stop it and send it backward.
Right. The human mind possesses a similar neuromuscular momentum. When a person says no, their entire organism, their glands, their nervous system, their muscles, gathers itself into a state of rejection. They are on guard.
They cross their arms.
Literally, yes. But when they say yes, the organism is in a forward-moving, accepting, open attitude.
I think of it like the predictive text or autocomplete on a smartphone. If you type the letters HAP, the algorithm predicts you want to type happy and offers it to you.
That's a good analogy.
If you get a human being to say yes to 2 or 3 minor premises, their brain's algorithm starts predicting more agreements. It becomes neurologically easier for them to agree with your main point because they are already moving in that direction.
Socrates built his entire philosophy on this. The Socratic method is essentially asking a series of questions that the opponent must agree with. You pile up one yes after another until the opponent suddenly realizes they have embraced a conclusion they would have bitterly fought against 20 minutes earlier.
And while you're getting these yeses, you have to deploy the next cluster of principles, which are all about empathy. Let the other person do a great deal of the talking. Let the other person feel the idea is theirs. And try honestly to see things from the other person's point of view.
This requires incredible ego suppression.
Really hard to do.
It is. If you want a colleague to adopt your strategy, you can't force-feed it to them. You have to let them talk. Ask them about the problems they are facing. And as they talk, you subtly guide them toward your solution, but you leave the final connection for them to make.
The story of Colonel Edward M. House and President Woodrow Wilson illustrates this perfectly. House was a massive behind-the-scenes advisor to Wilson. How did he influence the leader of the free world?
Very carefully.
He said he learned that the best way to convert the president to an idea was to casually plant it in his mind, almost accidentally, to get him thinking about it on his own.
And days later, Wilson would present House's idea as his own original thought.
And House didn't interrupt and say, "Actually, Mr. President, I told you that on Tuesday." He cared about the result, not the credit. We see this in sales, too. There was an X-ray manufacturer trying to sell expensive equipment to a hospital.
Oh, this is a great case study.
Instead of sending a slick salesman with a brochure, they sent a letter to the head doctor. It said, "We just developed a new line of X-ray equipment. It's not perfect. We want to improve it. As one of the leading experts in the field, would you be willing to look at it and give us your advice on how to make it better?"
Notice what they did there. They didn't ask him to buy. They asked for his expertise. They appealed to his importance.
The doctor was so flattered, he canceled a dinner date to examine the machines. And as he looked at them, finding little ways to improve them, he sold himself on how great they were. He ended up ordering them for the hospital. He felt the idea was entirely his own.
That kind of influence requires genuine empathy. You have to see the world through their eyes. And the sources offer what they call a magic phrase to instantly deploy that empathy and stop arguments cold.
The magic phrase, it goes like this: "I don't blame you one iota for feeling as you do. If I were you, I would undoubtedly feel just as you do."
Why is that phrase so powerful? Because it is 100% true.
Wait, really? Even if they're acting crazy?
Yes. Because if you were the other person, if you had their exact genetics, their exact childhood, their exact stressors, and their exact limited information, you would be reacting the exact same way.
Oh, wow, I see.
By acknowledging that, you trigger a physiological calming response. It stimulates the vagus nerve, which lowers their heart rate and defensiveness. You are giving them sympathy, which is what every human craves.
And once you have calmed the waters with sympathy, you can use the final tools of persuasion. Appeal to the nobler motives, dramatize your ideas, and throw down a challenge.
J.P. Morgan observed that people generally have 2 reasons for doing anything. One that sounds good, and the real one.
The real one usually being money or ego.
Right. The person knows the real reason, but they like to view themselves as noble and idealistic. If you appeal to that noble image, their sense of fairness, their honor, you can often inspire them to do the right thing.
And if they need a visual push, you dramatize it. The cash register salesman, he's dealing with a grocer who refuses to upgrade his old, slow registers. The salesman doesn't just show him a spreadsheet of lost revenue.
Spreadsheets don't sell.
They don't. He says, you are literally throwing away pennies every time a customer goes through your line, and he throws a handful of actual pennies onto the wooden floor.
The auditory crash of the coins, the visual of money on the floor, it bypasses the logical brain and hits the emotional brain.
Exactly. And if all else fails, you throw down a challenge. Charles Schwab had a mill manager whose workers were failing to hit their production quotas. The manager had tried yelling, pleading, threatening to fire them. Nothing worked.
So Schwab steps in.
Schwab visits the mill at the end of the day shift. He asks a worker, how many heats did your shift make today? The worker says 6. Schwab takes a piece of chalk, writes a massive number 6 on the factory floor, and walks away.
He introduces gamification, long before it was a buzzword.
The night shift comes in, sees the 6, and asks what it means. They are told the big boss wrote down the day shift score. Well, the night shift isn't going to be beaten by the day shift. They work furiously, and in the morning, they cross out the 6 and write a massive 7. The day shift comes in, sees the 7, and their pride is on the line. They work like maniacs and leave a swaggering 10 on the floor. Within weeks, the worst performing mill is the best in the company.
Schwab didn't increase their pay. He didn't threaten them. He gave them a game. The desire to excel, the chance to prove your worth. That is the ultimate challenge.
Okay, this brings us to the final and perhaps most difficult arena of human engineering. Section 4, leadership.
The subtle power of leadership.
Changing people without giving offense or arousing resentment, it's one thing to persuade a peer or a client. But what if you are the boss? What if you are the parent? You have to correct mistakes. You can't just avoid every argument. How do you correct someone without tripping that defensive circuit breaker we talked about earlier?
The first rule of leadership correction is begin with praise and honest appreciation. It sounds simple, but it acts as a psychological buffer. The text uses an analogy that I think everyone can relate to. The dentist.
The Novocaine analogy. When you go to the dentist with a cavity, the dentist has to drill into your tooth. That drilling is the critique. It's necessary to fix the problem.
Right, you can't just ignore a cavity.
But before the dentist drills, they inject you with Novocaine. The drilling still happens, but the Novocaine kills the pain. Praise is the Novocaine.
However, there is a massive linguistic trap that leaders fall into here. They administer the Novocaine, but then they immediately neutralize it with one single word, but.
The dreaded compliment sandwich. Johnny, we are really proud of your grades this term, but if you had worked harder on your algebra, your report card would be perfect.
The moment Johnny hears the word but, he questions the sincerity of the initial praise. His brain registers that the praise was just a manipulative lead-in to the criticism. The Novocaine wears off instantly, and the drill hits the raw nerve.
I think about this like writing code for a software program. If you insert a but into the conversation, it acts like a syntax error. It breaks the logic loop and the whole program crashes. But Carnegie suggests replacing the word but with and.
Let's hear how that sounds.
Johnny, we are really proud of your grades this term. And if you continue those same conscientious efforts next term, your algebra grade can be right up there with the others.
It changes the entire emotional resonance.
Yeah.
And is a functional operator that keeps the logic flowing. You have validated him, and you have called attention to the desired behavior indirectly without implying failure.
Which flows perfectly into the next leadership principle. Talk about your own mistakes before criticizing the other person.
Vulnerability.
Yeah. If I'm managing a junior employee who messed up a client presentation, instead of coming down hard on them, I can say, you made a mistake here, but honestly, it's no worse than the mistakes I made at your age. When I first started, I totally blew a pitch to a major client, so I have no right to criticize. But don't you think it might have been more effective to structure the slides this way?
It immediately removes the hierarchy. You step down from the pedestal of the flawless boss and become a fellow flawed human. It makes the critique infinitely easier to swallow. And importantly, it preserves the employee's autonomy, which ties into the next rule. Ask questions instead of giving direct orders.
Nobody likes taking orders. Even if the order is completely logical, being told what to do inherently breeds a tiny bit of resentment.
Right. Instead of saying, do this by 5 p.m., You say, do you think we could get this done by 5 p.m.? Or what do you think of the best way to handle this deadline? You are still guiding the outcome, but you are giving them agency in the process.
And what if someone really fails and you have to remove them from a project or a position? How do you do that without destroying them? The principle is let the other person save face. The story of Charles Steinmetz at General Electric is the ultimate example of this.
Steinmetz was a legitimate electrical genius. He was indispensable to GE's technical operations, but they had put him in charge of the calculating department. And as an administrator, he was an absolute disaster.
The terrible manager.
Yeah, they needed him out of that role immediately.
But they couldn't just fire him or demote him because he was highly sensitive and they genuinely needed his genius.
Most modern companies would just call him into HR, strip his title, and tell him to go back to the lab. It would have crushed him.
But GE let him save face. They gave him a brand new, highly impressive title. They named him the consulting engineer of the General Electric Company.
A promotion, basically.
It was a magnificent title for the theoretical work he was already doing. And once he had this new prestigious title, they quietly placed someone else in charge of the calculating department.
Steinmetz was thrilled. The company was thrilled. A massive crisis was averted simply because management took the time to consider his ego. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, the French aviator and writer, said it perfectly. I have no right to say or do anything that diminishes a man in his own eyes. What matters is not what I think of him, but what he thinks of himself. Hurting a man in his dignity is a crime.
That is so powerful. Hurting a man in his dignity is a crime. Real leadership isn't about tearing people down to assert your dominance. It's about building them up. Which brings us to the final principles. Praise the slightest improvement and give the other person a fine reputation to live up to.
This is based on the Pygmalion effect in psychology. People tend to rise or fall to the level of expectation placed upon them. Shakespeare wrote, "Assume a virtue if you have it not." If you treat someone as if they already possess the positive trait you want them to have, they will bend over backwards to avoid disappointing you.
I think of it like giving an employee administrative privileges in a software system. The moment you give them that admin badge, they suddenly feel the weight of responsibility. They don't want to mess up the system because you trusted them with the keys. The sources have a charming story about a doctor and his cleaning woman to illustrate this.
Dr. Fitzhugh and Bridget. Bridget was the charwoman who cleaned his office, and she was doing a pretty mediocre job. Dust everywhere, tarnished fixtures.
Now, he could have left a passive-aggressive note complaining about the dust. But instead, he left a note praising her. He thanked her for the fine job she was generally doing, and then casually added that if she ever had a little extra time to do the rare once-in-a-while things, like polishing the metal cup holders, he would be happy to pay her extra for the effort.
He didn't criticize the current state. He praised an idealized state.
And the next morning, he walks in, and the office is sparkling. It looks like a mirror. The cup holders are gleaming. Why? Because he gave her a fine reputation to live up to. She was no longer just a mediocre cleaner. She was an appreciated, meticulous professional. When you make a fault seem easy to correct, and you make the other person genuinely happy to do the thing you suggest, you aren't just managing them, you are inspiring them.
William James noted that most human beings live far within their limits. We possess immense latent powers that we habitually fail to use because we are bogged down by criticism, self-doubt, and friction. The ability to look at another person, see their potential, and draw it out through genuine appreciation is perhaps the most profound power a leader can wield.
Okay, let's step back and look at the massive terrain we've covered today. From bypassing the defensive circuit breaker of criticism, to feeding the universal hunger for importance, to orchestrating the neuromuscular momentum of the yes-yes method, and finally, leading with novocaine and empathy. If there is a single unifying thread connecting all of Dale Carnegie's human engineering, it is the absolute necessity of abandoning our own ego.
It really is.
It is about realizing that every single person you interact with is the hero of their own movie. If you want to connect with them, you have to stop trying to force them to be a supporting character in your movie and actually take an interest in theirs.
That is the mechanical, practical reality of human interaction. But as we wrap up, I think this raises a deeply provocative question for the modern listener to chew on.
What's that?
If we spend our days executing these principles, if we are constantly biting our tongues to avoid arguments, meticulously orchestrating yeses, praising others, and constantly aligning our perspective to match theirs, do we risk losing our own authentic voice?
Oh, that's a good point.
Are we just becoming a highly effective, frictionless mirror for everyone else's desires? Or is the deeper truth that we actually evolve into much larger, more effective, and profoundly impactful versions of ourselves precisely by reflecting the best in the humanity around us.
Wow, that is a brilliant question. Does abandoning the ego diminish you, or does it make you a giant among men? If you are listening to this right now, I really want you to mull that over. But to truly understand the answer, you can't just listen to us debate it. You have to go test it.
Put it into practice.
Tomorrow morning, when you interact with your barista, your spouse, or that one colleague who always gets under your skin, try it. Don't criticize. Find something to genuinely appreciate. See the world from their side of the desk. We highly encourage you to pick up a copy of How to Win Friends and Influence People to experience the full wealth of these stories and psychological insights for yourself.
It's a game changer.
And please, hit subscribe and leave a comment on the Decode Deep Dive channel. Tell us what happened when you actually put these tools to work in your own life. Remember, the next time you face human friction, ask yourself, are you reaching for the drill to prove you are right, or are you reaching for the Novocaine to actually solve the problem? Thanks for listening, and we will see you on the next Deep Dive.